The implementation of the National Housing Programme has been declared unconstitutional by the country's apex court following a lengthy legal battle between Bromwell Street, Woodstock and the city of Cape Town. The court has ordered the city to make available accommodation for the residents in the question in an area close to their current homes. Non-profit organisation Ndifuna Ukwazi's Disha Govender joins us for more. Disha, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Could you start off by maybe providing an overview of the Bromwell Street's resident situation and the events leading up to this legal battle?
So Hugo, the Bromwell Street families have been living in their homes for 5 generations. They were renting it from the family who owned the property and who over the years obviously passed it on and on and on until eventually the property was actually sold to a property development company called the Woodstock Hub, who, instead of choosing to continue to rent to the families, was wanting to redevelop the properties and obviously rent them out for higher incomes, for higher income groups. And so that kickstarted the eviction process, which the families faced. And we got involved with the families actually post the eviction order having been granted, but after realizing that the eviction order had been granted without the city of Cape Town having come to court to indicate what emergency accommodation it would provide to the families who were going to be evicted into homelessness. And so that kickstarted this litigation about 8 years ago. And 8 years down the line, the matter was finally heard before the Constitutional Court, who handed down really an amazing, victorious judgment, as I would say.
Okay, so let's talk about that judgment. What does it mean for these individuals, for these families?
So maybe just to start with saying that what the Constitutional Court found was that the City of Cape Town's implementation of the National Housing Code, specifically the National Emergency Housing Program, was unconstitutional for a number of reasons, including its blanket exclusion of emergency housing from the Woodstock, Salt River and inner city areas, where these are the areas that are undergoing intensive gentrification and seeing a lot of existing families who have survived forced removals being sort of priced out of the area and displaced into the outskirts. And so what the court did was it found that the city's implementation was unconstitutional and has directed the city of Cape Town to develop a temporary emergency housing policy which complies with its constitutional and statutory obligations. But in addition, and specifically in relation to the Bromwell families, the Constitutional Court has ordered the City of Cape Town to provide the families with emergency accommodation, alternatively transitional housing in the Woodstock, Salt River and inner city area. And they cannot be evicted until such time as the city has complied with those obligations and that directive from the court.
How many families are we talking about?
So they will remain in their homes for Christmas.
Fantastic. How many families are we speaking of?
So we are presently, we do have about 5 families that are living in the property and 2 individuals.
Okay, so
it's a total of about 24 people, including dependents and children.
So you talked about these families being able to spend Christmas at home. Now,
yes.
I want to focus a little bit on the possible anxiety that these families and individuals would have gone through. Now, this has been going on for 8 years, with literally a hammer or an eviction hanging over your head. How have they dealt with the emotional side, and what sort of levels of anxiety have you witnessed?
I am in awe of the strength of our clients. Over these 8 years, there have been incredible moments of anxiety, depression, real struggle with not knowing what is going to happen to them, and in particular to their children. And I think any parent in the country knows the fear and the concern that we have for our children and their futures. And so all I can say is with great awe do I look at these families and admire them for the strength and the fortitude that they've shown over the last 8 years during this battle.
Okay, so let's talk about the expectation of accommodation. I'm sure there's been a conversation, or there is going to be a conversation between the City of Cape Town and you as representatives of these families and individuals. What is your expectation on this emergency provision of accommodation?
So, of course, location is key. Where the emergency housing is going to be provided is actually what was at the nub of this matter. It was to ensure and protect against the displacement and the breaking down of the essential support networks that these families have to the community that they live in. So, of course, it's very clear from the judgment that where the emergency housing must be provided must be within the Woodstock Saltram inner city area and not on the outskirts in areas like Bolverfield or Campies. And then in terms of the actual nature of emergency housing, that's still to be determined. The court did order that that the city provide emergency housing or transitional housing. And generally speaking, emergency housing isn't at the same, on a structural basis, it's not at the same standard as, for instance, a BNG house. It can be of a lesser standard. And history has shown us that it has indeed been of a lesser standard. But I think in recent times, what people have been calling for is something called transitional housing, a more dignified response to emergency housing needs, which has sort of communal elements, where the actual structure itself is more than just a sort of a shack structure that is built from emergency kit material. That would actually, provide a more dignified space for people to live in.
So let's talk about compliance, because that's obviously going to be a key issue, right? How will you ensure that there is compliance, and that if you do move from the temporary housing before the emergency housing is actually provided, that there is going to be followed through within a certain period?
Well, the court order is pretty clear, and it says that the city must provide that emergency housing or transitional housing within 6 months. And one would expect all state parties to comply with court orders, and we will obviously be monitoring that compliance very closely.
Right, and finally, before we let you go, how might this ruling affect housing policies and eviction practices across South African cities?
So I think what is really critical is that the court has really clarified what municipalities' obligations are when it comes to the provision of housing, emergency housing, and generally what its obligations are in developing and implementing programs to give effect to the right to access to adequate housing. And so it's quite instructive to not just only the city of Cape Town, but to other municipalities across the country as to what it is that they need to be doing. So we do expect and hope that municipalities across the country will take heed of what the Constitutional Court has said, and actually we have hope and faith that they will take actions to ensure that people actually are provided with dignified housing.
Okay, final question, I suppose, is more human interest than anything else. Disha, was the work that you were doing pro bono?
Yes, so Ndifuna Ukwazi is a non-profit organization. We're an activist organization as well as an accredited law clinic. And so we have been assisting the families on a pro bono basis over the last 8 years in this legal battle. And just to say that, what this case also shows is the challenges that everyday people have in accessing justice. It's very difficult to take these issues up as far as possible, and especially all the way to the Constitutional Court without legal representation. And legal representation is particularly costly. And so we also are very happy that the Constitutional Court in this matter has directed the City of Cape Town to pay the costs of the litigation over the last 8 years.
So it's certainly been well worth your while. Disha Govender, head of Ndifuna Ukwazi Law Centre. Appreciate your time and wish you a fantastic Christmas break.